Welcome again, everyone, to the latest edition of the Opening Bell, where once again, for another week, the heavyweights are very much the talk of the town. We'll be talking about Tyson Fury's return and all that went along with it at the weekend. Conor Benn in action there, Huni Clark, Riek Poor, lots of heavyweight chat on the back of what happened the week before. We delve into the lower weights this week in history. We go back to Manchester in the early 2000s. Michael Brodie fighting Injin Chi, the Korean warrior, for the second time after their controversial, stirring first battle a few months previously. All of that's coming up on this week's pod, plus a flavour of the latest stories and news lines from the world of boxing. And as ever, it is the gift that keeps on giving, which will please my journalistic pal, Matt Christie. How's your weekend been?
My weekend was all right. Yeah, it was largely uneventful. Although Sunday evening, I thought, hang on a minute, I'm going to have to go and get a bit of first defence here. I could feel a bit of tickling going on in the old throat. And lo and behold, yesterday, woke up feeling atrocious. This morning, probably not so bad. So I don't want anybody to worry too much. But I'm not out the woods yet. I am not out the woods yet. My throat is still hurting. I still cough occasionally without warning. Sneezes come along to annoy me and everyone around me. So just watch out, see what happens.
Get that echinacea down your pal. Paracetamol and vitamin C, and away you go. Loads of fluids. And just your sheer will and courage, that fighter's instinct that you have to just attack life.
I'm drawing on everything to get through this, Alex. And God willing, I'll get to the other side.
Yeah, God willing, universe living, life living, whatever it is that you focus on, folks, to get you through it, whatever it takes. I'll tell you what would be interesting, a sort of a book or a study that actually listed and detailed all the troubles and travails that fighters go through week to week, camp to camp, because they often talk about never really having a clean hit at it, or very rarely having a clean swipe at a training camp, never really going through training particularly healthy and well. I remember asking Carl Froch that question in Vegas a few years ago. I think it was Frampton Santa Cruz 2, if memory serves. I had a really interesting night chatting to Froch. I was just able to pepper him away with loads of questions that I wanted to ask. I think I mentioned it before. It's really, really interesting. Of course, he didn't buy a drink all night, but he was happy to be bought them. But probably no surprise to people, that sounds a bit like Froch, doesn't it? But he was really engaging. He was good company. And I asked him that very question. And he said only once in his whole career did he ever feel, I'm in shape, I am strong, I am really well. And he said it was before and up to the Arthur Abraham fight. He said that was the one that everything went well. He felt great and he felt fit and strong and really healthy and well. So it is a rarity. It would make good reading, that, wouldn't it? A sample of stories of injuries and illnesses in the lead up to big fights.
It's interesting you say that about Froch in the lead up to Arthur Abraham. I remember sitting next to Tris Dixon while he was kind of painting over his preview. And I think he was going to pick Abraham. And he gave Froch a call just as he was kind of putting the finishing touches to it. I think he'd already spoken to him, but then he spoke to him again. And he changed his pick because Froch just convinced him that he was tip-top and everything else. And he picked Froch to win, and Froch won. We saw it at the weekend, didn't we? Regis Prograis, goodness me, the state of him going into that fight, clearly riddled with injuries. Could barely stand upright. But I also think that we spoke last week, didn't we, about fighters fighting on at a certain age. And I think when fighters come back and they've had a couple of years out, I think that kind of spell where they're not going through the daily grind of training for a couple of years can fool them into thinking that they feel better than ever because they're not picking up the day-to-day injuries. They have given their body a bit of a rest and they think they're as good as new. But yeah, I mean, gosh, with the comparatively little exercise we do and the little the pains that I get in my elbow and shoulders and knees, what they do so regularly, it's an impossibility that they can go into every fight 100% fit.
And also doing it, and like a lot of athletes in truth, in whatever sport, they're doing it on the very edge. They're pushing themselves to the absolute maximum and limit repeatedly. They're on the edge, and their body, particularly the fighters who are having to diet and monitor how much fluid they take, etc., ongoing, week to week, particularly the closer you get to fight week, that, you know, they are pretty much run down, aren't they? It's no surprise you see, I mean, Canelo always gets cold sores, doesn't he?
Yeah.
You regularly see Canelo with cold sores, and it's no surprise. They're just, their bodies are on their edge. Their bodies are screaming. Their bodies are saying, leave me alone, give me a break, feed me. So even more so for them, given what it is they're going through. It's absolutely unbelievable, isn't it? Absolutely unbelievable. Let's talk about Fury and Makhmudov, because there's no doubt for 2 rounds, Fury looked terrible, didn't he? He looked terrible. And I think you probably saw what a visual representation of ring rust really is and looks like with Fury in those 2 rounds. Aided and abetted by Makhmudov's aggression and will and fitness and attitude. And it took a few rounds, didn't it? Fury looked really, really poor for those first few rounds, Matt. But as the steam from Makhmudov wore off, and it wore off pretty quickly, as Fury got his mojo back, and that happened relatively quickly, then he started to find his feet, quite literally, and then he took control. And from pretty much the 5th round onwards, Makhmudov's steam, aggression dissipated. His limited ability came to the fore, and Fury was able to take control. How much did what we saw afterwards, Matt, shine a light on how much of the old Fury remains? How good did he look in context?
After the rust had been shed, I thought he looked like one of the best heavyweights in the world. Should look against an opponent like Makhmudov. He didn't look like the Tyson Fury of 2020. Didn't look like the Tyson Fury of 2022. Didn't even look like Tyson Fury of 2024, in my opinion. I still think he's one of the best heavyweights in the world. I'm not saying he's the best. I'd say you'd put him in top 5 comfy. You could make a case for him being top 3. But kind of reminded of the fact that I feel like the division needs to move on, in all honesty, throughout watching that fight. The division just needs to move on and let in new blood. But what does astonish me, every time I watch Tyson Fury fight, every single time, because that middle-age spread is at probably its most spreadable now at the age of 37. He doesn't look like an athlete. And when you see him suddenly up on his toes with the speed that he's got in his legs, the speed of mind that he's got to throw those combinations, it defies belief that he's able to do what he's doing. And it defies belief, frankly, that he's still able to produce that level of performance at the age of 37 after the way he's lived his life. So credit to Tyson Fury for that. I thought if he was coming back and he was going to do it the right way, as in that's the first step, really. That's the first rung up the ladder towards securing another title shot. Makhmudov, even though some people will tell you that was the number 5 heavyweight in the world. No, he wasn't. But that was a respectable first step. But ultimately, it is the opening act of the latest Tyson Fury show, isn't it? What he hopes will be the curtain raiser against Anthony Joshua. So, yeah, I thought he was good. And I thought if boxing was a normal sport where he would slot in and then try to become the best again, then it was an excellent first step for him at the age of 37. I think he's got enough left, should he have the desire to make another charge towards a title shot, to probably secure one, but not win it.
in context, he looked good ultimately, didn't he? But he was supposed to look good, and Makhmudov is so limited, poor wild swings. He tried as best he could, and then he ran out of gas and he couldn't do any more, and he was clinging on the longer the fight went on. So context is absolutely necessary here, but there was still a bit of the old foot movement. And ultimately, that was the kind of opponent that Tyson Fury needed at this stage of his career. And it'll have ticked a load of boxes: Money in the Bank, fight back, training camp, got some rounds, I think, importantly. You said curtain raiser against Anthony Joshua. Do you mean curtain raiser, or do you mean curtain closer? Because one means more than one fight, the other means something else.
Yeah, I suppose it's kind of the whole theatre of the ridiculous narrative at the end of the Tyson Fury fight. It to be honest, it bothered me no end. Old grumpy Matthew. The calling out of Joshua and the way that all played out, I thought was the most cringeworthy thing I've seen in a British ring for a while. But we'll get to that. We will get to that. But you're absolutely right to kind of highlight the limitations in Makhmudov. What I didn't hear anybody saying was, okay, well, we probably do need some context here for how good Tyson Fury really looked. So what should we go and look at? What Ajit Kabiel, probably the most deserving contender out there of a title shot at the moment. Look what he did to Makhmudov. Even look what the Italian Vianello did to Makhmudov. And then compare Tyson Fury's performance. Now, Tyson Fury is a different fighter to both of those. And his approach was different as well. I think there's a few times where you sense that if Fury had really gone for it, he might have been able to get the stoppage, but he certainly seemed to be enjoying himself. He probably wanted the rounds. But this was not some kind of all-conquering return. It was beating a guy that was handpicked because, for two reasons. Number one, he was coming off a win over Dave Allen, the biggest of his career. And number two, he was deemed as being recognisable because of that victory, and that it would on paper appear a really good comeback test for Tyson Fury. But ultimately, Tyson Fury got the job done in the way that I thought he would. I thought he might be huffing and puffing for a few more rounds at the start than he did. But ultimately, a fairly lopsided points decision for Tyson Fury is the way that I expected it to go. And it's not often that I could sit here all smugly and say, well, that went the way I thought it would. But it did. And Tyson Fury is back. Did it, however, underline what Tyson Fury was saying beforehand, that boxing has missed him, that boxing hasn't been the same without him? For me, it showed that boxing most certainly hasn't been the same without him, but is boxing better now he's back? I'll let everybody else decide on that. There was a lot of attention around the bill. There were also a fair few empty seats at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. It's no secret that the sales were disappointing. We haven't seen, or I haven't seen, the Netflix figures yet for how many people were watching. I dare say it simply must have been in its millions. But whether the appetite is there for Tyson Fury that he thinks is there, and the people that are currently guiding believe is currently there, I think he's up for debate.
Yeah, loads of the tickets given away. Still a sizable crowd. A friend of mine went and said that the atmosphere was pretty good sort of early on, but that people got very restless very quickly. And what did they expect? What did they go there to see? Certainly what they seemingly went there to see on balance isn't what they expected, or indeed what they were delivered. So there was a restlessness, I think, and maybe a crowd on balance that weren't quite entertained in a way that they thought they were going to be. But anyway, that was just one anecdotal piece of evidence. As regards the sort of AJ Fury charade, I thought Joshua's response to it all perfectly summed it up. And I have no chips in either camp. I have no stakes in the game. I'm neutral. I have no real desire one way or t'other. But I thought Joshua, probably the way he reacted to to Fury's theatre, shall we say. And by the way, that fits pretty much with all of the Ring magazine and indeed some of the Netflix presentation. It kind of all fits in with it, doesn't it? I mean, the commentary from Mauro is full of similes and metaphors, and it's kind of commentary that's always aimed at the game-playing generation, isn't it? Commentary for effect and some clumsily delivered lines that are aimed at a certain audience, and that chimes with the Ring magazine. I mean, I saw a tweet last week from the Ring. Derek Chisora kind of stuck clambering through the ropes, and they had sort of popcorn emojis up above that. That was a Ring magazine tweet. So it kind of fits in, this whole kind of almost comedic theatre, this WWE kind of wrestling style shout outs and drama or soap opera nature of it. It kind of all fits in, and the commentary from Netflix kind of feeds into that as well. So it's no surprise really, whether you like it or don't, it's probably not for you and I one way or t'other. But I do think that Joshua's response kind of pretty much hit the nail on the head for a lot of people, where he said, I've been chasing you for 10 years, mate. There was a weariness, but a humour about Joshua's response to it all, wasn't he, Matt, in the end? And I thought it kind of probably went close to how a lot of people have kind of grown weary of all of this. As much as many of us will probably enjoy the build-up, should it happen, and enjoy the fight, should it happen.
Yeah, look, let me just say straight off the top that should the fight happen, I will look forward to it. I will get involved in the build-up to it. And I hope that the fight delivers in some way to this ludicrously long runway that it's had. But I was relieved almost that Joshua acted in the way that he did and said what he said, because all it really needed was for Joshua to get up on his feet, dive over the top rope, get Tyson Fury in a headlock, and we are right into WWE. Because it just reminded me of WWE. My wife grew up loving WWE. I have never liked it. And I think I've said this before. One of the biggest reasons why I don't like WWE and not really into the UFC is I feel like they hijack some interest away from the sport. I remember going to my local news agents where they used to have all the American magazines, KO, The Ring, World Boxing, Boxing Illustrated. And I went there 1 month to get my monthly fix, and 3 out of the 4 had been replaced by wrestling magazines. And I was like, hang on a minute, what's this about? But anyway, my wife loves it, and there's been a few documentary series on Netflix recently, which I've watched with her, and I've found them fairly interesting. But the moment Tyson Fury started shouting from the ring down at Anthony Joshua, who is sat there, I was like, this is ridiculous. And I'm glad that Joshua basically said, no, you're all here essentially trying to bully me and make a fool out of me. Turki Al-Sheikh had said early on, hadn't he, during the broadcast that we've got a surprise for you. But the truth of the matter is that it wasn't a surprise. Joshua was there at ringside. Fury was going to have a fight. It's not exactly. It's not exactly keeping clues away from the audience. But I was glad that Joshua wasn't in on it, essentially, or he wasn't there to add to what was, in my mind, a ridiculous bit of theatre. I was very glad that he did that, and I thought that Anna Woolhouse afterwards, with the interview with Joshua and what Joshua said, I thought Anna handled it really well, and I thought Joshua kind of came out of that kind of as the better person, really. And it's completely fair enough, is what he's saying. He alluded to this car crash that he was involved in at the end of last year, where he lost 2 of his closest friends, and that was, 3-4 months ago? And they're essentially expecting him to now sign on the dotted line and fight Tyson Fury, when Joshua doesn't really know where his head's at the moment. And I think he deserves to be granted that time to know where his head's at. And if he doesn't feel that he wants to go straight into a fight with Tyson Fury with no warm-up, then that's up to him. This isn't a fight, really, that has any significance within the tapestry of the heavyweight division moving forward. It's kind of it will be a standalone event that, frankly, will hijack the importance and the attention away from realistic fights that is gonna take us forward within the division. What would 99% of people be more interested in? Usyk versus Cabiel or Joshua versus Fury? Joshua versus Fury, but what's the more significant fight? You could even take Cabiel out of that and put Usyk Itoma, which I think the hardcore would love to see. But the vast majority of people will want to see Joshua Fury. And we're almost in a position at the moment, I feel, where the longer this soap opera continues, we're stunting the growth of the rest of the heavyweight division. So if you're going to do it, let's do it, get it over and done with. But as for what Joshua's behaviour, his decorum, the way he conducted himself, I thought was about as classy as things got on Saturday night.
Yeah, it was. It was impressive. And I think it kind of chimed with the mood of how many people are feeling. I always think the litmus test of this kind of stuff, you've talked it before about, conversations with cabbies. I know Steve Bunce always talks about that, doesn't he? Conversation with cabbies, you get a sense of a big fight, etc. I think the litmus test of how people are feeling is often when you interact, as I do, with people in other sports on a daily basis, who know that I'm a kind of boxing man, inverted commas. And so they'll always often want to ask me questions or talk about that. And this week, going back into those other jobs, that other area of work, that other sport, there was a lot of sort of weariness among those people who dip in and out of sport. And even they were kind of rolling their eyes. Even they were saying, well, it's 5-10 years too late, isn't it? Even people who don't necessarily follow the sport, they were up on that. They were catching the mood, catching the vibe. And Joshua was really ringing true about how people are feeling. So interesting, all of that. And I did find it fascinating. I found it fascinating. There's lots of other sort of little. And by the way, one final thing I would just say. We're talking about the theatre. Boxing's always had that element of sort of theatre to it. That promotion, self-promotion. It's always had an element of that. But more times than not, it hasn't had to be engineered. The sport can talk for itself. The narratives come from either the action or the characters. In wrestling, is part of the whole thing, because the actual wrestling itself doesn't necessarily carry the weight for everything else. The actual action is almost a sideshow to the various storylines. And we'll have listeners of ours who do like the wrestling and also love boxing. That's fine. But the difference is boxing is always the boxing, and the other stuff is just a little embellishment here and there. And it's always better when the storylines and the enmity, those flashpoints, when they're real. But it's always about the action. It's always about the action and the event itself, not that other stuff and the stunts that sometimes go along with it. So if you're trying to engineer that, which is what they were doing again and again on Saturday night, and it's what Turkey, the Ring, and those associated with him, that's what they're trying to do on a regular basis. And I think they've got that wrong. I think they misunderstand what it is that makes boxing great. You don't need that stuff. If it comes, fine, we'll use it. But trying to engineer it, you're going down the wrong road. It's not necessary.
No, I completely agree with you. And kind of, this is all clearly Turki Al-Sheikh's idea. And he might be kind of a lovable little comedy character in boxing if you didn't kind of do too much reading into his backstory. But it's like, now this is what I want this now. So how do we I want this to happen next? And I always get my own way. It's like when he plucks Francis Ngannou out of one discipline and throws him into boxing because he wants to see it happen, and he puts him in with Tyson Fury. And he wants this fight, and he wants this ridiculous fight. oh yeah, can we have that light heavyweight fight, that lightweight? No, it doesn't work like that, Turks. It doesn't work like that. It's but at the same time, I'm sure there's plenty of people that think that it is progressing the sport. And you speak to certain people that know which side of their bread is buttered, and they will say there's never been this much interest in boxing. That might actually be true because boxing has never been on Netflix before, so it's never been generating these audiences before. But is the current interest sustainable if you want the sport of boxing to be what it's always been? Or are we kind of taking boxing out of its conventional arena and turning it into more of a WWE, where certain things like titles and ability doesn't matter? They're all secondary to storylines and personalities. Who knows? Who knows? The problem boxing's got is that the system hasn't worked. Let's face it. The system has been broken for about 30 years in regards to the championship system. So there's not a lot to beat there. But I just do wonder about the direction that the sport is heading in, and the people that are watching events like Saturday night, what their perception of the sport is. Is it a sport in their eyes? Or is it just kind of this weird, violent entertainment, which is engrossing? And I kind of say all this, and even though Fury Makhmudov wasn't the best fight in the world, I'm quite happy sitting there watching it. I'll watch the boxing. I enjoy watching the boxing. Ben Prograis wasn't the best fight in the world. I'm quite happy sitting there when watching that, chatting to you on WhatsApp and chatting to some other people on WhatsApp about the actual boxing.
Yeah,
it's all the other nonsense
absolutely.
that does my head in.
But that is absolutely true. But that we're preaching to the converted, and we are the converted. But my wife sat down to watch that with me because Josh and Fury are two names that chime with her, and she'll sit down and watch either or both of those. I should have written down the round. I can't remember, but she went off to bed early.
Yeah,
she's like, I'm not watching this anymore.
Yeah.
But that's another story in itself. And by the way, I don't think either of us are saying that we shouldn't constantly be evolving and innovating and maybe trying to do things slightly different. Of course not. Absolutely. If the innovators, the creators, the ideas, men and women are out there, absolutely do your stuff. Give it a lash. The more options, the better. That's absolutely not what we're saying. A couple of other things I want to touch on with regard to sort of Fury Makhmudov. There were images and videos that came up in the build-up of Dr. Usman Sajjad in Fury fight tracksuit gear, part of, inverted commas, the Fury team in the build-up. This is the same guy who has gone on record talking about doping in sport, talking about possibly aiding and abetting fighters in that regard, possibly working with Conor Benn and Tyson Fury in the past. And there he was, very visible during fight week, Matt. What did you make about all of that? Fury, by the way, coming in at 268 pounds. That's nearly a stone lower than he was in the second Usyk fight.
He didn't look a stone lighter to me in the ring. I'm not saying he wasn't. Just as I kind of tried to explain earlier, his body is succumbing to middle age. So it's kind of got a bit of a different shape about it. But yeah, I mean, was I surprised to see Dr. Ooze, as he's known in the business, Dr. Ooze kind of reappear? Not in the slightest. Not in the slightest. You got to be careful what you say, haven't you? But I think if you go back and listen to what Dr. Ooze has said publicly about doping in the sport, about how easy it is to cover up, about the fact that the British Boxing Board of Control distanced themselves and had to release a statement saying that Dr. Ooze was nothing to do with the British Boxing Board of Control 18 months ago or whenever it was, that the people within the sport, whether that's representative of fighters or fighters themselves, should think very carefully about who is in the background of photographs that insinuate they're involved in their camp.
Okay. And a couple of final points. fair play to Fury wearing the Ricky Hatton-esque shorts, the rest in peace Ricky on the back of his shorts. And although we've perhaps rolled our eyes when Fury, it was fun initially, wasn't it? Fury doing an Elvis song at the end of a fight, or Neil Diamond or whatever. It was a bit fun at the time. It became a thing, didn't it? But actually, after this one, he was serenading the late Ricky Hatton with the One Ricky Hatton song as well. So fair play to Fury for all of that, acknowledging the passing of someone that he would have known well enough.
It was a lovely touch, I thought, from Tyson Fury. I thought with what he was wearing, and to kind of hear Blue Moon at the start as he was emotional, thinking about his pal Ricky, who he worked with, who helped Tyson kind of come back from the depth of despair in 2018, 2019. And it was clearly an emotional moment. I would have liked, actually, and I could feel myself getting a bit emotional at that point, is if the Blue Moon had continued and that had been the song to take him to the ring. I was disappointed when that finished. But I also understand why it did. That's Ricky Hatton, wasn't it? But I thought that was a nice touch from Tyson Fury for sure. And frankly, I've said all this stuff, and I know I don't really listen back to the podcasts anymore because I just find myself getting on my own nerves. You're just so kind of annoying with what you're banging on about, and it's like my opinion really matters and things like that. But I must say, a Tyson Fury ring walk, when you're there in the crowd, or you're wherever you are and you're covering the fight, a Tyson Fury ring walk is always a memorable deal. And it was the case again on Saturday night.
With the Fury, everything about Fury is just a walking contradiction, isn't he? He gives, he takes, he'll say this, he'll say that. He's always been like that through his life. There are positives and negatives. Listen, you have to say, let's not forget, Fury's moved to the Isle of Man now. Now, he's saying that because it's because of security issues. The tax benefits are obvious as well. And I think you'd be naive to think it's not one rather than the other. I'd say at best you're being naive. So there's always stuff, there's always this and there's always that with Fury. There has always been this and been that with Fury. And you just have, we have to take it, and that's 1 minute to the next. That's one day to the next. That's his existence.
It is. And I think that when you've kind of spent time interviewing him and covering him for as long as we have, that as much as on the one hand, he can say something witty and quick that I wouldn't be able to come up with as quickly as he does. I haven't got that gift of the gab that he's got. And you laugh and it's funny, but then it's just a little bit tiresome, kind of the nonsense that comes out of his mouth. Like I remember being out for the first Deontay Wilder fight, and he was banging on, and he's in a fireman's costume, saying that he'd taken his shoes off and given them to a homeless man. And you look down, and this was the point where he was saying he's going to dedicate his whole purse to homeless people, which I think we can say now that he didn't do that. But you also look down at his feet, and you look at the size of his feet, and he's like a size 14 or 15, and you think, there's no way you stopped and gave your shoes to it. You just didn't do that. What are you saying this for? And I think at the weekend, and genuinely, hand on heart, I was impressed with Tyson Fury at the age of 37, turning in that kind of performance. Still having that kind of desire. He's clearly dedicated himself to the sport again. I'm impressed with all of that. What happened in the ring, I'm impressed with. But it's when you hear an interview with Tyson Fury 2 weeks ago saying it's very disrespectful to talk about my friend AJ, who's motivated me to come back to the ring when he went through everything that he went through in December, and then essentially screaming in his face at the end of the fight. But that is Tyson Fury. That's what he's about. And that's why I think, Fury will be remembered predominantly fondly. There's no one else in history like him. And I think he will be remembered as one of the best heavyweights. I know people will scoff at that and say, oh, well, he couldn't have beaten this person. Tyson Fury, on his day, would have been a difficult fight for any heavyweight in history at their peak. I include George Foreman, I include Muhammad Ali, I include Mike Tyson, I include Lennox Lewis, I include all of them. When the Tyson Fury that walked through Deontay Wilder in February 2020 would have been a difficult proposition for any heavyweight in history. And I think in another world where there wasn't a lockdown immediately following that fight, or in another world where he didn't fail drug tests after he beat Vladimir Klitschko in 2015, Tyson Fury might be regarded as the best of them all. I've said it. But there were flashes throughout his career of a great heavyweight. There's also flashes of a ridiculous one when he's punching himself in the face when he's on the way up. And that he kind of went from that to what he got to in February 2020. Everyone believing he's the best heavyweight in the world. We were calling that one of the best away day victories of a British fighter in history. People forget that now because Tyson Fury does shoot himself in the foot by being an idiot. But some of the things he's achieved in the ring have been incredible. But he is an idiot. It just gets a bit tiresome after a bit. But you got to admire what he's done inside that boxing ring.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there still may well be more to admire yet. So we'll see where Fury AJ takes us if indeed it happens. There was a fantastic line from AJ afterwards with Anna Wilhouse where she asked him if he would have a warm-up fight. And he said Fury could be a warm-up fight after that, what I saw in there tonight. Part joke, part not joke, I think, in truth, from him.
Exactly, but this is kind of the thing, and I suppose I have made it clear that if from my experience and from a human being perspective, having spent time with them both, who I prefer, Fury and Joshua, I've probably made that abundantly clear. That is from experience. That it's just the way it is. But ultimately, if Tyson Fury really wants this fight, and he said in the post-fight press conference afterwards that it is Anthony Joshua next, or I'm going to retire, surely he can wait until Joshua has that warm-up fight, if that is what Joshua feels like he needs to do. Because he's going to be waiting, and he's going to be sending himself doolally in retirement for an awfully long time. Just hang on an extra few months. If that's the way it's going to be, if that's the way it has to be to make this fight, just hang on. Anyway, I'm bored, Alex. I'm bored.
Let's move on. Let's move on then to something else you might not want to talk about. Ben. Very good. Very good. Ben Prograis, of course. Ben against Prograis. I mean, Prograis' balance looked terrible, didn't it? Particularly through the first round or two, where it looked like he was going to be overwhelmed and knocked out. It looked certain that he was all going to be over in a few rounds. And then, for a number of reasons, I think, and you can debate which of these is more significant, Ben's lack of subtlety, Ben's lack of firepower, dare we say it, or Prograis' toughness, courage, and durability, and then getting maybe a bit used to the tempo and rhythm and the power and the punching of Ben. Which of those things do you think was more at play, or was it indeed a combination of them?
I think it was a combination. I think myself included, I think if you'd have asked me, I can't remember if you asked me for a prediction last week for Ben Prograis, but if you had done, I'd have to say that Ben would win by knockout. And it will be convincing. And that was kind of twofold. My thinking there was that, number one, Ben has improved, and last time we saw him at welterweight, he was ferocious. And common sense or logic might therefore dictate that if he's coming down to a weight where he says it's his natural weight, then he's going to be even stronger. And the other thing to consider is Prograis' decline. and it seemed like quite cynical matchmaking in that they're kind of plucking a name out of the queue for the retirement doors, and they pick on Regis Prograis. I don't think it was a particularly impressive performance at all from Conor Benn, but I think a large part of that is because everybody's expectations, including Conor Benn's, have been heightened by the ludicrous events that have occurred over the last 3 or 4 years. Conor Benn is regarded as, outside of the heavyweights, the most marketable fighter in the UK. And that is purely because of notoriety achieved from failing drug tests and the attention that he then received afterwards and for a period of time that whole case generated, and then his performance up at middleweight, where he had no business competing against an established world-level fighter in Chris Eubank Jr., who was very clearly shot to pieces in the second fight. And I would venture the cracks were substantial first time round in Chris Eubank Jr. And then Conor Benn is now facing Regis Prograis, who is as canny as they come. Clearly came in that if he hadn't been being paid what he was being paid, he'd have pulled out. The fight wouldn't have happened. And I thought Ben struggled. And I think that if Prograis could have moved, he just couldn't move. If he could have moved, he would have won that fight. But again, Conor Benn is kind of a symptom of this whole condition that we've already described within boxing, is that it's not necessarily about the ability, it's about the stories you can tell and how many people are interested in those stories. It's about the personalities that you can manufacture. It's not necessarily about the talent, because let me put it another way. I agree that Conor Benn is probably one of the 3 most marketable fighters in the UK. But I think if you put it down to ability, he's not in the 15, 20 best fighters in the UK, pound for pound. So something there is wrong. What's that about? Shouldn't the best fighter be the most marketable? Shouldn't the best fighter be the one that everybody wants to see? But also, having said all of that about Conor Benn, I also was reminded of his debut last week, because I think it was the 10-year anniversary of his debut on the Anthony Joshua Charles Martin undercard. I remember being ringside for that, thinking, oh, this kid's quite exciting, but he's not going to do anything. And then seeing him in his first 10 fights, and that opinion didn't change. The fact that he is now able to beat an admittedly old and ravaged Regis Prograis, I still think is testament to the belief that he has himself and what he puts himself through pretty much every day to ensure that he is in fighting shape. But I also think it is merely a matter of time before he is humbled to an extreme degree, should he venture too high in class.
Is Ryan Garcia too high in class?
Yes. A motivated, a well-trained Ryan Garcia is too high in class. Yes. Yes.
Of course, that fight would pit 2 fighters who have failed drug tests, who have posted doping violations, and who were both essentially supported by the WBC.
Yeah, and arguably supported by certain commissions as well. I'm not going to include the British Boxing Board of Control in that. We know what the British Boxing Board of Control tried to do in regard to the Conor Benn case, but ultimately, I think, essentially ran out of resources to keep fighting the fight. But yeah, I mean, it kind of says it all, doesn't it? Like, you know, and we've said this before. What's Ryan Garcia's reward for his year ban? Oh, it's a world title shot, and he could probably claim to be one of the most marketable fighters in America. But again, and I say this or I allude to it nearly every week, we've got to be really, really careful with what we're saying when we're on our soapbox. We need to remember where our soapbox is placed. It is within the sport of boxing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Is it lazy or obvious for fans, pundits, or anyone else simply to draw conclusions that because a couple of years ago, before he posted those positive tests, Conor Benn was knocking out aging fighters, and now a few years on, post-positive tests, he isn't necessarily knocking out aging fighters, even although they are aging fighters who are at the very end of their careers. Is it too easy to join those dots?
It's easy to join the dots. It's worthwhile thinking about other factors, and I can only really, I would say, in fact, I would say it was easier to join those dots when Conor Benn had those 2 fights in between testing positive and Chris Eubank Jr. and 2 fighters, you can't even say they were fringes world class really, went the distance with him on 2 occasions, and that's the first time in a while that Conor Benn had been the distance. So I think at that point it's easier to join the dots. I think with this time there might be some other things that could potentially be between the dots to stop them from being so easily joined. Like, I always thought it was a gamble for Conor Benn, after spending so long essentially campaigning as a middleweight, to then just think, well, I'm a young man, I'm going to go back down to welterweight. And we don't know what effect that had on his fitness, on his power. But ultimately, not enough people are attempting to join those dots as well within the boxing media. Which I understand. Conor Benn at the moment, if he's the most marketable fighter in the world, and I've seen people get stick recently for not asking Conor Benn certain questions, is if those people work in the media and they work in the boxing media and their job is interviewing fighters, and Conor Benn is the most marketable fighter in the UK or amongst them, you can ask one question, you're never going to get an interview with Conor Benn again. Now, it's okay for the likes of you and I who are independent, but when you're representing a radio station, whether you're representing a magazine outlet, whether you're representing a YouTube channel, you could also be affecting that channel and thus your own existence within it. So I understand it. I'm not going to go kind of rage at anybody that isn't asking the questions that everybody wants them to ask. But I also think the question is one that simply has to be asked to stop these dots from constantly appearing every single time Conor Benn fights. So if he would simply tell us the reason why he was cleared for having that illegal substance in his body on 2 separate tests for 5 weeks apart, and thus help anybody else who may have fallen into a similar trap, then he would be doing his duty for the sport. And why it's such a difficult question to ask and for him to answer muddies his reputation. He should have been willing a long time ago to come out and go, look, this is why. Absolutely outrageous what went on there. I don't want this to happen to another fighter, so I'm going to tell you exactly what happened. The fact that he hasn't, and the fact that it's a no-no, that you're not allowed to ask him about it, will make people draw certain conclusions.
And Zuffa made that big move for Conor Benn. They've been making other moves in recent days as well, because Berlanga moving over, Richardson Hitchens moving over. They're both moving over, despite the fact that they don't have weight divisions to move into, do they? Because there's no super middleweight and there's no 140-pound division. So I'm assuming that means Berlanga's going to have to move up to light heavy, and Hitchens is going to have to move to welterweight. And Chris Billam-Smith, just in recent days, has signed as well, just this week, a multi-fight deal, reportedly, for Chris Billam-Smith. The gentleman is going to Zuffa as well. You can't blame these fighters for seeking out the opportunity. And Conor Benn has got just about one of the best deals that have ever been made in boxing, whether it means anything more going forward or not. Even if it's just that one-off, he's made one of the best deals in boxing history. And in terms of value for money, or what you saw at the weekend, you can draw your own conclusions about that. I'm sure you'll have your own ideas about that. But Chris Billam-Smith, does that mean he's been teed up for Opataya?
Very possibly. I mean, that's kind of rumoured. Look, any boxer that's offered life-changing money should take it. And I know that Conor Benn got a lot of stick, and I think that probably the way that was handled, and then the subsequent he said, she said with Eddie Hearn and Conor Benn, which is kind of ongoing. Yet, no, he didn't lend me money. Yes, you did, you little shite. No, you didn't. No, yes, you did. All of that we could do without. But even though we all like to be loyal, when you're offered that amount of money, I don't think anybody that listens to this can look themselves in the mirror and say, actually, yeah, no, I'd stick with my current employer. Because everything that Conor Benn said around that time was true. He has got to look out for his family. He is going to be an ex-fighter in 5-10 years' time. And then what? So, yeah, I think any fighter that is offered a deal that is significantly bigger than anything they've been offered before or are like to get offered should sign on the dotted line as soon as possible before that offer disappears or before the people that are making that offer disappears. As for Chris Billam-Smith, I'm delighted. He's a family man. He's got young kids. He's 35 years old as well. He's only got so much time left, and he's kind of waited patiently for certain opportunities to develop, which haven't come. His contract with Boxer, who he's always spoke exceptionally highly of, by the way, his contract with Boxer came to the end of 2025, and this opportunity has presented itself fairly early in 2026. Good luck to him. I think the only question mark with the weights and the fighters is, hey, what fights can you feasibly make at the moment? But the one fight that CBS has always wanted is Jai Opataya. And they've got him. So, yeah, no-brainer, I'd say. Absolute no-brainer for any boxer that's offered a lucrative deal at this stage.
Absolutely, particularly at that stage of life, that stage of your career. I think he's got one eye on the exit, Billam-Smith. I've no doubt about that. And there it is. That's a richly paid exit door staring him in the face. Multi-fight deal is probably incongruous, I think, looking at it completely dispassionately, because that's a one-fight deal, isn't it? I mean, likelihood is that's a one-fight deal. As good as he is, as tough as he is, as likable as he is, if Billam-Smith's going in with Opataya, that's a one-fight deal. And if it's a well-paid one-fight deal, fine. So what? You're right, Matt. They've got to look out for themselves, but we're looking at it neutrally. We're looking at the bigger picture. And as I've said before, there's a bit of chaos in the wind. And if you've got, Zuffa are trying to do their own thing. The fighters have to be self-determining. They are just simply looking at the big bucks, and they're going to do their own thing. So there's going to be a bit of chaos in the wind and some fracturing, and there's going to be more of this, I think, in the next year or so.
Yeah, I think you have to be, Chris Billam-Smith is as grounded and as wise as any active fighter I've met in the last goodness knows how long. So he will undoubtedly have looked at the specifics of the contract. But I think when Zuffa are posting things like it's a multi-fight contract, we have also seen contracts where if a fighter loses, it is within. So it might be a multi-fight contract if he keeps winning, but if a fighter loses, they can be discarded. And there's already some whispers about that sort of thing happening out in America to lesser known fighters than their star names. But yeah, you lost a fight. See you later.
Yeah, and there are ongoing multi-million-dollar lawsuits going on between sort of the UFC and UFC fighters as well. There's always that in the background, so you can read about that. But Berlanga and Hitchens, they're Keith Connolly managed fighters as well. I think Teo Lopez is too, isn't he? So I don't know if that is an indicator that Lopez might make that jump as well. And we'll speak next week about the new TNT DAZN deal, which is going to be happening stateside, bringing the sort of the fight as a new show stroke idea brand starting in early July. So we'll talk a bit about that next week as well. Big event down in Southampton for Ryan Garner. He's got a sort of world title related challenge against Magnisi. Louis Edmondson taking on Lyndon Arthur, and that one as well. That's going to be on June the 20th in the summer, right in the middle of summer, down in Southampton. So we'll talk about that next week as well. Justice Hooney just edging out Fraser Clark, who was much better, but got edged out on the cards. Richard Riakporhe became a British champion, stopping Jamie TKV. Wonderfully incongruous shout out afterwards from Riakporhe. I do like him, Riakporhe, but this absolutely sums up modern boxing in one sentence. Beautiful, this. Beautiful. Get a load of this. The shout out from Riakporhe after becoming a British champion. I'm going to be looking at Fabio Wardley or Daniel Dubois, winner of that, or Johnny Fisher. Yeah. Yeah. Modern boxing in one sentence, folks. I'll go for the big fight, the titles, or I'll go for a name and I'll go for a little bit of the socials. A little bit of the socials. Give me a bit of the socials. Yum, 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 yum. Oh, funny. How'd you like them lemons?
I love them. But I mean, look. Riakporhe looks like a bit of a beast at heavyweight, doesn't he? Not saying he's going to. I'm not going to say he's going to conquer Johnny Fisher, but he's heavyweight seems to be to his liking thus far. But yeah, I mean, I remember that. I missed that fight actually, and I was keeping an eye on what was going on with the live reports on Boxing Scene, because there's various things that I was trying to implement and report anyway. And so I read that quote before I heard it, and I thought they've got that wrong. Then I went back and listened, and no. To be fair, it makes business sense. You're covering the bases. It's just funny. It's just so funny. This weekend, up in the Hydro in Glasgow in Scotland on Friday on DAZN, rematch Collins against Laurenti. Nathaniel Collins, short price favourite to win that one. I think he'll have learned plenty from the first fight, where he probably took his foot off the gas and allowed Laurenti to come back into it. Though the betting lopsided, he's 1-3 Our very own Reece Lynch, 3-0. He's in action on that as well. Good luck to Reece. We'll get him back on maybe next week or the week after. Stateside MVP card, Baumgartner against Bomi Rishin, who's been the distance with Delphine Pursoon and Caroline Dubois, and Callum Smith Morel off. Callum Smith out of that one, sadly. So it means Ben Whittaker on Saturday in Liverpool becomes top of the bill against Brian Suarez. Both Peter and Joe McRail on that bill as well. So all of that coming up this weekend. So plenty of boxing for you once again. Coming up next, it's This Week. And this week we take you back to the 10th of April 2004 at the then MEN Manchester Arena. It was a rematch between Michael Brodie and Injin Chi. He's a manic marauder of a fighter, says Ian Darke of Injin Chi. And of course, they'd fought previously, the year previously, Matt, in a stirring, bruising, bloody battle with head clashes and controversial scoring. Ultimately, no surprise that this one was rematched the following year. And ultimately, Chi would do more of the same, and Brodie probably
depleted from that first battle and from a pretty solid bruising career.
Yeah, the first fight highly competitive. The second one was one-sided in the extreme, really, wasn't it? It's almost like Fury Wilder 1 to Fury Wilder 2. But the first fight, yeah, is noteworthy. It was controversial. It was back when the WBC had a rule where that if there was an unintentional headbutt, then a fighter would lose a point. But Brodie was initially declared as a loser. He was on the way home when he got a phone call to say, actually, the points hadn't been tied up. It was a draw. And you could, but the general consensus was that the Brodie hadn't quite done enough, but given his exceptional effort throughout, he didn't really deserve to lose either. And I read the Boxing News preview for the rematch this morning. And the prediction was that Brodie would box a little bit more clever and he might be able to get the decision. And the pick actually was that he would get the decision and that he would be disciplined. And I mentioned earlier that about Tris Dixon speaking to Carl Froch and Carl Froch convincing him. I think Tony Connolly, who was writing for Boxing, he was writing the Boxing News preview at the time, was probably convinced while what he was hearing from the Brodie camp. So first time round, they said, look, the only reason we didn't win that fight is because our energy levels dipped in the 10th and 11th rounds, and we gave those rounds away. Michael was having problems with a lengthy separation from his then partner. Took him a long time to get into camp, and so the weight had to be crashed. This time, we've had full camp. He's made the weight fine. He's running at 100 miles an hour. And he can. We've all heard these kind of things as boxing journalists, and there's no reason to think anything other than the person is telling the truth. But in the end, Brodie wasn't the fighter that he was in the first fight. And what Tony Connolly did say, and I'm not trying to make out that Tony Connolly was a bad judge here, one of the stipulations within his preview is to win this fight, he cannot be dropped and get careless early. And unfortunately, that's exactly what happened in the opening round of the rematch.
It just shows you the difficulty in sometimes too much information, sometimes being a little too close, or just sometimes trying to juggle and balance all of the information. It puts you in a hard position, Matt, doesn't it? As a journalist, as a previewer, when you're that close. And I've said it to you before on this pod and said it to you. I almost want to just shake you during fight week and just say, get out of there. Get out of there, because it's such a difficult position for you to be, really.
It is. And the best example of what a build-up to a fight and a fight week can do for you would be when I watched Canelo Golovkin 1, which you were ringside for. Admittedly, I was up in the gods, but watching closely on the screen, was the way that Canelo came on in the last 3-4 rounds. Even though I thought Golovkin won the first fight 8 rounds to 4, I thought the way Canelo came on, I thought he's worked him out. If there's a rematch, Canelo is going to win that fight. And at some point between the first fight and the second fight, I just went loopy, just completely changed and said Golovkin's going to win. But if all the evidence I needed was there in the ring on that night, that if they do it again, Canelo has learned more than Golovkin has and he will win a return. I mean, frankly, it's debatable that Canelo did win that return. I thought the second fight was so close. But anyway, I digress. But yeah, a fight week will send you mad. The amount of times I've been at a Manny Pacquiao fight week, people like Chris McKenna, Declan Taylor will be able to tell you this. The amount of times I've been at a Floyd Mayweather fight week, the Maidana Mayweather 2, I'm like, by Friday, I'm thinking, lads, Maidana's going to chin him tomorrow. on the Friday night before Floyd Mayweather Andre Berto, I'm saying, Berto's got half a chance here. Mayweather's old. Berto's got half a chance. Fight weeks will get into your brain and they will seduce your logic and they will take it away. To experience them like that is bizarre with what it can do to your logic. And I think was it you and Barry Jones that were talking once and said, look, once you've once you've got your prediction, you're educated within the sport. You know both are fighters. You're pretty certain on your prediction 2 or 3 weeks out. Stick to it. Just stick to that. Unless you have got concrete inside information on something. Their leg fell off on Wednesday, but they've had it sewed back on Thursday. In that case, yeah, bet against the fella whose leg's been sewn back on. But unless you're certain about all of these things that you're being told, stick with your instincts.
Yeah, it's so tough. So tough. A big shout out to our great sponsors, NAS Medical. They're leading independent experts in ringside medical care. They provide global medical coverage for professional and amateur boxing events, ringside medicine training, and basic life support accredited courses. Boxer safety is their priority. You can find them at nasmedical.co.uk. Thanks to them. And also thanks to some new Patreons as well. Lovely Patreons paying less than $5 a month to support the pod. And we do need your support. So thanks for that. Trevor Mera has signed up. Trevor, you're a star. Thank you so much. Michael, don't have a surname, but Michael has signed up as well. Thank you, Michael. Richard Jones has signed up as well. All became full paid members this week. And thank you to our friend and colleague as well, Craig Scott. Craig, you'll remember Craig. He'll have written for you, Matt, at Boxing News.
Look, once you've encountered Craig Scott, you don't forget him. Is he signed
Top
up
man.
as well?
He has, Craig. He actually DM'd me this. He DM'd me this week. And by the way, Craig's a good example of people sort of making the effort when they might not necessarily be in a position to. So thanks to Craig's got kids. He works. He's juggling everything. Sometimes you got to sacrifice one to do the other, and he's willing to do that for the Opening Bell pod. So thanks, Craig. We appreciate you, mate. We appreciate you. And actually, it's amazing how many of the boxing journos had to juggle sort of writing boxing with a full-time job elsewhere. You're lucky, Matt, that you're able to pursue this passion and love through your career as well, because it's not always the case, is it?
No, and you know what? I am aware of that. It may not sound like I am sometimes, that I'm not aware of how lucky I am to have that luxury. And yeah, even now, 20 odd years in, yeah, I'm still completely aware that I am one of the lucky few to do this full time.
Back to Brodie against Injin Chi. I mentioned that line from Ian Darke. Love listening to Ian Darke. Ian Darke commentaries is a bit like going down HBO history as well. There's just so much quality there. He talks of Injin Chi as being a manic marauder of a fighter. And he wonders, in the first few lines, how much did the first fight take out of Michael Brodie? The talks of Injin Chi having the strength and stamina of a Grand National winner. Of course, this would have come on the back of Grand National Week, as this pod comes to you on the back of Grand National Week. And just before the end, in round 7, he says something like, sometimes the gas tank is empty and you just can't quite do it anymore. That almost tees up the possibility that Brodie is wilting, that the first fight took so much out of him, that the hard, long careers may be just knocking on the door. As ever, Ian Darke absolutely spot on in this one.
Yeah, he was. And it is always a pleasure to hear Ian Darke and Jim Watt, frankly. I always used to like Jim Watt, never understood the stick that Jim Watt used to get. Found Jim Watt bingo kind of amusing with the arm punches. Things like that, but yeah, Jim Watt I think sorely missed as well in broadcasting. Kind of told his opinion was always an honest opinion, even if it wasn't the opinion that everybody else shared. But Brodie was at the end of very close to the end of a punishing career, and it was kind of one step too far for him. There was this wave of hope that he would get over the line and he would win a world title. And it was that tag that he had, that he's one of the best British fighters not to hold a world title. He was kind of operating just as Ricky Hatton is kind of putting the final stages to his charge towards a world championship. There's talk that there might be a showdown with the comebacking Nassim Hamed, who was said to be watching closely. So that kind of gives you some context on what era we're talking about. Hamed had already kind of scaled the mountaintop, but had one eye on this fight, we were told. But then afterwards, Brodie did say, look, Naz would never go in with this guy. He is formidable. Naz would never have fought this guy. And I do think she is someone that we don't really remember. There's a lot of fighters like this in history that for a little period of time were indeed formidable. And he looked it on this night, didn't really have the marquee name on his record to kind of work his way into Hall of Fame conversations or anything like that. But yeah, for a little period, he was a heck of a fighter.
Yeah, went the distance with Eric Morales previously, and gave and took stick with Morales over 12 rounds. Not always the prettiest, not always the most cultured or technical, but relentless and just hits and can take it in Jinchi. Really a tough night's work. And at this stage of his career, after the first fight, just too much for Michael Brodie, who did try, didn't he? He had sort of moments. He was better in the third round. Crowd really got into it. The heads came close together again in the fourth. Again, he was ducked a point, or this time officially ducked a point in the fourth. And he's just trying to come back into it in the sixth and seventh when Injin Chi, it's just one assault too many, isn't it? And you have to watch it a few times to see what the punches are that do the damage. But there is a right hook to the body, and then there's a kind of left hook stroke uppercut that is the finishing shot. But I think it's the body shot after all the damage and the wear and tear that is just too much, Matt.
That seemed to be the one that took the wind from the sails. Excuse me. I'm all right, everybody, don't panic. But yeah, that did appear to be the finishing blow, and you kind of see Michael Brodie go down like that. All of the heartache that he'd have felt first time round, how much he'd have dedicated himself to that moment, and just how soul destroying and depressing it must be in the days after a fight like that, where you've essentially dedicated how long for the first two fights, best part of a year, to conquering that person, only to be told in the most violent fashion that you're not as good. You're not going to win that world title. Could have taken some comfort first time round because, as I said, there's a lot of good feeling and there was some contentiousness. And on another night with different refereeing decisions, he might have nicked that decision. But on this one, to be stopped like that, would have been sobering in the extreme. And I think the first fight was the last time we saw the best of Brodie. He was never anything like that again.
No, worn down, mauled really by Scott Harrison and Anthony Crawler after this, right at the very tail end. But Matt's right in terms of timing. Hamed lost to Barrera 0-1 a few years later. There's talk of a comeback. It's a year after this. Well, what is it? It's 8 months after this that Ricky Hatton is beating Costa Zhu. Those are all the markers. I remember this time so well. It's such a great period for me. I remember it well, living in London. I think I didn't be up in Crystal Palace at this time, going out clubbing, watching the boxing. I love this time. I love it. And a couple of fighters who were on the undercard that I remember really well because they had three stirring battles. Jamie Moore and Michael Jones. Salford's Jamie Moore, Liverpool's Michael Jones. So there was a bit of that sort of Manchester-Liverpool thing, wasn't there? And Jamie Moore had beaten Michael Jones the year before. They both won by stoppage on this night. It'd be a month or so later that they would fight again in the second fight. And that was the fight where Jamie Moore was DQ'd, having hit on the break. He was DQ'd really early on in that one. And then it would be a sort of a year later where they'd have the third fight in the trilogy and Jamie Moore would win that in the sixth round 2-1. So Jamie Moore and Michael Jones we'll probably have a couple of their fights on this week in history.
We should do.
Yeah, we'll do that. Well, the DQ's coming up in November, so maybe, and the third fight's coming up in May. So yeah, we'll do that. We'll pop those on the list. Moore and Jones from this week in history, where we're remembering Michael Brodie against Injin Chi. Go back, watch and enjoy that. Thanks for your support once again. We'll speak to you again next time. Bye for now.